with your business, you clearly advocate for fruits and veggies. What is your view on pesticides?
So we use very minimal pesticides in some of our farm operations, which are all organic. There's things that I guess are called pesticides that are organic labeled pesticides. They keep pests out, but they're things that are basically that you can eat, right? So there's certain things like garlic and cayenne and even dipel that is you could buy that keeps the worms out, is you can eat it, right? So those are pesticides. And then we do have our conventional farm, and there's a lot of thought that goes into the way that we grow our 3,000 acres. We have now 3,000 acres under production in vegetables. We're the largest vegetables grower, maybe in the eastern United States, for sure in the state of Florida. There might be one or two other vegetable growers that don't grow for fresh pack. They grow for like bird's eye, things like that. So they grow more acres, but it's not hand packed and shipped. So as far as a packer that packs fresh and goes to the direct market, we might be the largest in the East Coast of the United States. But to really understand that, it's kind of a long answer. But it started when I started as a first generation farmer at the age of 19. I didn't really know much at all about farming then, and I didn't realize how little I knew until I got older and better at it. I made a lot of mistakes. I was doing things the way that some friends of mine that grew up in farming, they were showing me how to farm, and they were doing it the way that their father did it, and there was really a lot of bad practices there now from what I see. There was a lot of chemicals used that I would never consider using now. The worrying about the soil health was not a big issue right then. At that time we were using methyl bromide. It basically sterilizes the soil, and then you put your inputs in. I liken that to chemotherapy for cancer. Like you're just going to basically knock out and irradiate everything and then put in what you want, and it's really destructive to the soil, and we would never farm like that. And there's very few people, I think, right now that are even farming like that, thank God, anymore. But it's been this evolution, and the farm practices really changed a lot after. You remember when Timothy McVeigh hit the Oklahoma City there, and they used a lot of that natural fertilizer. It was organic fertilizer with a lot of nitrates in it that they used in the truck there. Well, whether that was intentional or whether you make the use of any bad situation, the fertilizer companies and some laws came out that actually changed the way that they were allowed to distribute high nitrate fertilizer, and as a result of that, a lot of synthetic fertilizer came out on the market, things that were not as natural, and it became more widespread. And with that, unfortunately, came a lot of more unhealthy fertilizers. So fertilizers that didn't have as much of an organic base, didn't have as much micronutrients in it. And as this became more and more widespread, and it wasn't immediately, it's kind of been perfected. And a lot of it is also done for money. They could develop fertilizer for cheaper using, you could still get the same NPK out of this fertilizer that didn't have as much organic ingredients. And as these growers started using it around the country, they're growing a less healthy plant. I liken that to the same thing as if you go and eat McDonald's food every day versus going and eating healthy, fresh vegetables every day. So you're still going to be healthy for a while, but eventually it kind of catches up to you. And the same thing happens with the soil that they're putting this fertilizer in. So as they would grow the plants that would become kind of less healthy over time because you're depleting the soil by putting this lesser fertilizer in there, we get sicker plants. And as you get sicker plants, guess what? The same companies that were selling you the chemical fertilizer are there to save the day and sell you some different chemicals to remedy the plant, much like the pharmaceutical company does to the folks that are eating McDonald's every day, right? Mm-hmm. So, and oddly enough, this actually comes back and joins again back at the top, because what ends up happening is they end up growing these crops, and the crops that they grow are basically void of many nutrients because it's grown with this chemical fertilizer. So if you're growing a tomato or you're growing, whatever, a head of romaine lettuce, if you're growing a honeydew and you're growing it in this fertilizer that doesn't have the micronutrients, it's not going to be in the product, especially in the bigger things like corn and wheat and things of that nature. So what ends up happening is you get a food that is a lesser dynamic food. It has less nutrition in it. So as a result of that, we eat this food and our bellies get full, and our brain is still crying for more nutrition. Your brain is not foolish. It knows when it's missing all these different micronutrients. And this has led to the widespread obesity across our country because people will, you go to McDonald's and you would eat a Big Mac and fills your belly up and everything, but 2 hours later, you're hungry again because your brain is telling you, like, I need these minerals that's not in there. And so the odd thing about it is the same company. So Bayer Pharmaceutical owns Monsanto, and they're all intertwined, but they're selling the fertilizer. Then the sick plant. Then they're selling the chemicals to the farmer. Then the farmer produces the product void of nutrients that is going to the consumer that then ends up getting sick and needs pharmaceutical drugs that is oddly enough supplied by the same company that kind of caused the problem in the first place. So it's this big circle that's going around and around. So and I was kind of onto that at an early age, maybe even 20 plus years ago, and my father got into organic farming. He was the one that taught me a lot about what was going on in there, and he was bringing me these studies. He loved to print things out. I remember when we got his first fax machine, he thought it was amazing. He's not a very technical guy, but then he found out he could look things up and print them out. And he was always bringing me these studies, and one that he brought in particular was from Rutgers University, and it was one that kind of supported this narrative that he had been telling me about, that he had been doing different research, but it was kind of nice and concise, and it was showing that in like a tomato grown in all organic nutrient soil that has all the micronutrients, in some cases it had 50 to 100 times more of that nutrient in that product than one that was grown in a conventional NPK fertilizer. And he's like, see, he says, this is the proof. He says you can eat one of these tomatoes, you have to eat 100 of these tomatoes to and that's maybe for one nutrient, but there's a lot to be said to that, and so at that time I wasn't farming. I took 17 years off from farming. I started farming when I was 19 and got out of it when I was 23. I went broke. I made almost $1 million when I was 19 years old, and went farm. Thought I was going to be a big farmer. Started farming. It took me 3 years to go broke, and I was doing all the farming the wrong way. So I'm glad I went broke. It was a good thing because I would have just been producing the toxic vegetables if I'd have kept on that course. But 17 years off. In that time that I was off, my father started farming, very small, very like 5 acres at a time, and he was really doing things the right way. And he taught me a lot of the process that we're doing now. And even at our what we call our conventional farm, which is where it's not militant organic, we grow all of our 3,000 acres is grown with. It's Everlizer fertilizers is what we use, and it's basically chicken manure that's pasteurized. So it doesn't have the really bad smell. It's not wet. It's not dangerous. But as far as people think of that as being something that you wouldn't want your food in. But it's actually composted for about 1.5 years, and it's super nutrient with all the micronutrients in it. We also use a lot of pine bark mulch. So that again is ground up pine bark. And you have to let it heat up and really decompose. And if you don't do it right, it will. And this is from trial and error. You will actually, if you put it in there too hot, it'll suck the nitrogen out of your soil because it's still decomposing and it uses nitrogen to decompose. So we were kind of innovators in that in using that, and now we've got it down to a science, and we're putting all these nutrients in the soil, much more than you would have to in other areas of the country, because Florida soil is closer to sand than it is to soil. So so there's a lot that we have to do to it. And if you know, if we were growing the same crops up in the continental U.S., up into Georgia or up into New Jersey, and you know, in the mountains, there's a lot of really rich soil there, and you don't have to work quite as hard. But down here, we have to work really hard to get that. Several things we're trying to accomplish. First of all, we're trying to accomplish a soil that has a lot of microbial activity in it, because the microbial activity, you know, when you think about, okay, how does a plant assimilate all of the micronutrients that are in the soil, and how does it get there, right? When we eat something, we just, maybe you might use a fork. Sometimes I grab it with my hands, but we have to put it in our mouth, right? So the plant needs the microbes to be working in there, and the more microbial activity that you have in the soil, the more feeders. So it's going out there and getting the microbes are getting that fertilizer and bringing it into the plant, and that's how it's. So if you have, you know, 3 or 4, you know, 100% more microbes in the soil that the plant's living in, it's going to be super happy and healthy. And if it runs low, then it's going to have a hard time, especially during dry times of the year, or even when you get the wind. You know, you have storms where the wind beats it up, and the plant stresses much like a person would under different conditions. But when it's got that good base of microbes and nutrients, then not only does the plant stay healthier, and that's kind of circling back around to the long, you know, the beginning of the question, is when you got a healthy plant, you don't need much pesticides. You don't need as much spray. It's just like if you eat every day healthy vegetables, you're not going to need pharmaceutical drugs. If you eat at McDonald's all the time, you're going to need those pharmaceuticals, because your body's going to be devoid of nutrients and things. And it's the same way with the plants. If you give them all that they need in the soil, then you know, they're going to be healthy. And I gotta. It's odd actually. I'm not a huge fan of Bill Gates, but I'm not saying that he doesn't have some great qualities. Some, you know, there's good and bad in everybody, even me, I guess. He started. He's been buying up farmland, as a lot of people know in the news. And about 8 or 10 years ago, he bought a huge farm up in Georgia. We bought it. It's called Coggins Farms at that time. The gentleman that I knew there was he was a really good farmer. He grew a lot of carrots and cabbage and different vegetables, and I've known him for a long time. But he was kind of farming the way that I did back in the day. His father actually was even a fertilizer salesman. So they're kind of old school Georgia. That's the way, you know, they did it. So Coggins got offered by Bill Gates a huge amount of money to buy his farm, and they did. And they called the name of the farm, it's called Generation Farms. And Bill Gates decided that he was going to turn Coggins Farm into an all-organic farm. And we were, at that time, I thought that was pretty interesting, because we were trying to basically blend a way that we would do most of everything down here in an organic fashion. And when they bought the farm out, my friend said that this isn't going to work. He didn't believe in the organics. He totally was a naysayer. Like a lot of the Georgia farmers are kind of a certain breed, different breed. They just been doing things the same way. I wouldn't want to call him closed-minded, because he's a really, really smart individual. He had an incredibly successful farm, good businessman, but he definitely didn't believe in the organics. So when Gates came in and took this farm over, he did aptitude tests for everyone, and he ended up giving my friend an aptitude test there. And I guess I should say his name, but I won't. But they gave him an aptitude test, and he thought it was a joke, because he's like, you know, he's got the kind of hillbilly accent and everything. He's like, "You're going to give me a test, tell me what I'm good at, right? I know what I'm good at. So he takes the test, and it comes back that he is suited best to be an organic farmer. And he thought that was so absurd. But he's like, he had signed on to stay on with Gates for a couple of years. So they ended up sending him all over the world. They sent him first to Oregon, and then they sent him over to Europe and all these different places to learn about organics. And he was used to working, you know, 70, 80 hours a week. So he's kind of having the time of his life, going around seeing these places, not really working that hard, and little by little, he actually started to buy in on the organics, and it took a while because he came in as a complete skeptic, and so cut about 4 years after that, he still stayed on with the company, and I was up there. Our seasons start down here in South Florida, and then they migrate up. They go to North Florida and Georgia and Carolinas and finish up in Delaware, New Jersey area. And then that's the end of the season. Then it actually works its way back down again. But I was up there for that type of that time of the year, and we were harvesting a lot of tomatoes at a partnership farm close by. So I went over to say hello to him, and he said, "Man, I got to show you something." He said, "We got this 20-acre field of green beans right here," and he said, "I planted them the same time as a good friend of his that he grew up with right down the road, and his friend planted the exact same variety of beans at the same time, and his friend's field, we went and drove through, it was loaded with whiteflies, just loaded, and he was spraying them, and over at Generation Farms, they weren't spraying them with anything, and there was hardly any bugs there." And it was because of the soil, and they were using the Everlizer, and so they're still that farm's still going on today, and this is going back quite some time ago. But it really made me a believer in little things like that. I think it was meant to be. It was meant for me to see that, because it was that happened just shortly after I started farming again back down here in Florida. And at that time, I think I was only farming maybe 100 acres. And we started out with 50 acres about 11 or 12 years ago, and then grew it to 100, and then 300, and then up to 3,000 about 5 years ago. And but it's real. Like even a guy that did it all his life didn't believe it until he saw it himself. And the other thing that we didn't do a test on, but obviously the argument's already been made by Rutgers University, is how much healthier those beans are than the beans that are grown in the conventional farm. And it kind of seems like a sham, right? It kind of seems like when I see the food that most Americans are eating, and I go by the lines that are at McDonald's and these fast food places, and it really does hurt me. It hurts me because there's a lack of education. And I'm not saying that if someone eats a Big Mac that they're going to die, but if you eat that type of food day after day after day, you're going to suffer the consequences. And the widespread increase in disease and autism and all these different issues that we're having in this country, I believe are directly related to what we're putting in our body. And the way to correct that is to just do things the way that our great-grandparents did it, or our great-grandparents, is just have real good soil, eat healthy things, eat things the way that is meant to be eaten, and we're going to be healthy. But there's not a lot of money in that. The money from the big corporations, from these big pharmaceutical companies, from these big fertilizer companies, the money is in doing exactly the opposite. So the way out of it, the only way out of it, is education. Because if the consumer becomes really aware of what's going on, and they start to understand that there is pink slime in that McDonald's hamburger that's killing your gut bacteria, and they become educated, and that is what's hurting us, then we stop buying it, and the free enterprise system corrects it. So just like with the, look at Facebook is as long they keep censoring and shadow banning and all that stuff. Well, there's going to be someone else that's going to come out with something that's going to be more popular, because they're not going to do that, because the American people don't like it. And sometimes it's a slow process for people to wake up, but people are waking up in that realm, maybe not quite as quickly on the food, on what they're putting into their bodies, because there's so much advertising. And it's one of those things where, well, everybody's doing it. How bad can it be? Everybody's doing it. But at the same time, everybody's getting heart disease. Everybody's getting cancer. It's become commonplace to think when you're 70 years old or 80 years old that you really shouldn't be, running 10 miles a day. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. My father's been dead now since he died in 2013, but he was showing me about these this. I wouldn't say Indians, but they were natives to a place up in a really out of the way area in Russia, and all they ate is fruit and nuts, like their whole life. They were basically secluded from any processed food, and they're what was custom. And these guys were 90 years old, and they fall off a horse and get back up. And there was a documentary that he showed me on that, and it really is the way that it could be if we eat the right things. And it's become part of my passion. My passion at Food and Thought is to have everything without chemicals, and all of our bread is made out of heirloom wheat that is not toxic to your body. We would never sell any meat in there that had pink slime in it. And I'm not saying that, I tell people that we have chocolate cake in there everything is made from scratch. There's no preservatives in it. It's eggs and sugar and butter and all that stuff. And if you eat a piece of conventional chocolate cake, it's going to be as healthy as you can get because there's no preservatives and there's none of this.
That makes you feel better.
Yeah, I mean, and you can have some of that. You can't eat that every day, right? You can't eat that as your main diet. But if you're going to eat it, at least you're not getting all of the other poisons. Because you look at you go into just about any regular chain store and look at the ingredients that's in a piece of the chocolate cake there, and there's going to be at least 15 ingredients that you're going to have a hard time pronouncing. And that's not the way it's supposed to be.